During Lent, we've been doing something different with the sermon time. I've been doing more of a teaching sermon than a regular style sermon. And we've been following certain themes that run throughout the Bible. There are overarching themes that make up what we call the salvation story. And so throughout Old Testament and into New Testament, all of the stories and poetry and everything that you read there in narrative can be seen in light of one of these four themes. Now, you should know what these themes are by now if you've been with me, so I'm going to just test that out a little bit. Who knows what the first one is? Creation, and then sin, and then judgment, and then redemption. Yes, great. So creation meaning God's intent for us to live in harmony with ourselves, with God, with each other, with all creation. That's God's intent in creating the world. And so when we talk about the theme of creation, we're talking about that intent of God for harmony. And then as we move to the theme of sin, what we remember is that humankind disrupts that harmony over and over and over again. That God intends the harmony, we disrupt the harmony, and that breaks God's intent. And so we end up with a situation that is broken, in which we live our lives. And God responds to that situation by doing two things. One, by using whatever means is at hand to expose the brokenness. Sometimes the voice of one crying in the wilderness, so to speak. Sometimes somebody's personal experience that all of a sudden wakes them up to see a brokenness that they had been blind to before. Sometimes just sort of a gentle nudge inside of us. But in one way or another, God's judgment comes in a way that exposes the brokenness. To judge this is broken, so that you can judge it's broken. Because once we see that something's broken, then we can be healed. Then we can be healed, and that's where the redemption comes in. And so we've been looking at that in all of these readings that have been coming from John during Lent. And the readings that we have been looking at, one of the kinds of harmony that they've been looking at is the harmony between flesh and spirit. The fact that God created us both body and spirit with an intent that our spirit and our body would be in harmony with each other. And yet, in our own brokenness, sometimes we get so hyper-focused just on the physical that we are blind to the spiritual. And so God acts in ways to expose our spiritual blind spots. And once we realize we have a spiritual blind spot, then we're in a position to be healed. Now that is a good bit of what this story I just read is about. This story of the healing of the man born blind. Because in all of Jesus' healing stories, all of the stories operate on both of those levels, a physical level of healing, but also a spiritual level of healing as well. Sometimes we think we have to pick one, but we don't, because we are created to be a harmony of the physical and spiritual. What affects the physical affects the spiritual. What affects the spiritual affects the physical parts of who we are. And so this story is both about the healing of this man, a physical healing, which is a wonderful demonstration of Jesus' power of healing. And it is about that, but it's not only about that. And Jesus makes that very clear towards the end of the story when he's beginning to speak more of the spiritual blindness of the Pharisees. It was easier for him to heal the man who knew he was blind than to heal the Pharisees who spiritually had no idea that they were blind. And we are meant to connect mostly with that story of the Pharisees. We are the people in the story who have blind spots, spiritual blind spots, that we don't even know about, that we don't even realize that we have. Now, if we were in a class at this point, I would ask you to share with somebody a time when you realized you had a spiritual blind spot and what happened. And then we would collect those. But this isn't a class, it's sermon time, and that makes a limited amount of time. So I'm going to do the sharing, and I'm going to share with you about a spiritual blind spot of my own that was exposed. And I remembered this Tuesday night after I got home from soup and a movie. think it was the movie clip at Soup and a Movie that, well, I know it was a movie clip at Soup and a Movie that brought this to mind for me. Just so I can kind of bring up those who weren't there, the clip was from a 1976 movie called The Box. And in that clip, it starts off and you see it's a house, fairly, it's a nice house, nice middle-class house. There seems to be a son, a mother, a father. We never see the son again in that particular clip. A man drives up, we can see it through the window, leaves a box on their doorstep and then leaves after ringing the bell. And so they go out and here's this box. And they pick up the box and they bring it in. And it's just a box. It's a nondescript box. It doesn't open, but it has a bubble on top, either plastic or glass or something. And inside that bubble is a button. They have no idea what this is all about. And they wonder about it. And they're about to be in a wedding for friends, and they all like to play practical jokes. So they think maybe this has something to do with a joke that's going to be revealed on the night of the wedding or something. But a few days later, the man shows up. And he's even more mysterious than the box, and has a horribly disfigured face. And he comes in, sits down at the kitchen table with the wife and the husband. And he takes a key out. And he unlocks the bubble, opens it up, and now the button's exposed. And he says to the wife, he says, I am authorized to tell you that if you hit that button, you will receive $1 million. And he said, so you know I'm serious about this. He pulls out a briefcase, he opens it, and there's $1 million in cash. And he says, and here, I'll even give you a $100 bill. You don't have to do anything for that. And he gives her the $100 bill. He says, but if you want the rest of it, you're going to need to hit the button. And of course they're going to think about it, because he said, if you hit the button, someone you don't know will die. If you hit the button, you'll get the $1 million, but someone you don't know will die. Well, so they think about this for a couple of days. And they're going through all the pros and cons of it. It probably just a joke, so it probably doesn't make any difference whether I hit the button or not, What does it mean to know somebody, When he says it'll be somebody I don't know, will it really be someone I've never met, or is it just somebody I don't know, like deeply know? Because maybe that would make a difference. And they go through all these different things. And in the conversation you hear that he works for NASA, he makes a pretty good salary, it's okay. Someday he'll advance, make a better one. But right now they're a little strapped. She hadn't had some dental work or something done that she needed to be done because it's not in their budget. So $1 million would make a difference to them. So they're still arguing over all of this when all of a sudden she hits a button. And that's where our illustrious leaders, Tom and Brandy, cut the clip for the discussion. I'm still going to have to rip the video, the DVD now to see how it turns out. And I can remember thinking at that time, well, I wouldn't do that. I mean, that's a clear-cut moral choice. I wouldn't take $1 million and hit a button, even if it was somebody I didn't know that was going to die. I wouldn't want to be responsible for that. And then later that night, I started thinking. And I started thinking about those times when, without thinking, I do or buy or participate in something that's beneficial to me, but without even really thinking about it, may be costly to somebody else, somebody I don't know. And a specific example came to mind. It happened years ago when I was at an inner city parish. And during Coffee Minute, one of our white social activists, we had a parish of half African American and half whites, and most of the whites were social activists, came to me in Coffee Minute and said, why is it that we don't buy fair trade coffee for coffee hour? Well, at that time I had no idea what fair trade coffee was. So I said, I don't even know what that is. What is it? Well, he was a PhD, so I got a bit of a dissertation following. And he reminded me that the coffee that I buy is grown basically in third world countries. And he said, but what you may not know is basically it's small farmers and plantations, and the conditions are absolutely horrible. The companies that buy it from them do not give them a fair price. Usually what they give them barely covers their cost. It doesn't cover their cost of production at all. and puts them in a cycle of poverty and debt. And then when it's on a big plantation, they will work them overtime without paying them. They will have children and wives work too and not pay them anything. And it's not safe, and the conditions are just horrible. And the more he talked, the more I started thinking, wow, that sounds like the plantations back in the South in times of slavery, or the sweat house situations in England. He said, well, it's like a sweat house. He said, we call it a sweat house in the field. And I said, oh, that's really bad. I didn't know that when I bought my coffee. And he said, well, there's a thing called Fair Trade Coffee. And he said there's a nonprofit organization that certifies that things are grown under fair conditions. That it certifies that the coffee, in this case, that you buy, that the people who grew it have received a fair payment for it in their own economy, but a fair payment for it, that the workers have received fair wages. It certifies that no child labor was involved. It certifies that there are health and safety issues that are standards that are there for their working. So it certifies that this coffee was grown under less exploitative circumstances. But the catch is it's a little bit more expensive, maybe $2 to $3 more a pound than the other. And lots of different, in Knoxville where I was, lots of different stores handled it. I'd seen it before, but I just didn't realize what it was. Well, he and I went to the vestry and talked about maybe switching over and buying fair trade coffee. They didn't want to do it because it would cost more money, and we were a poor, struggling parish. And so my friend felt strongly enough about it that he just bought the coffee from then on for the congregation himself and bought fair trade coffee. But it opened my eyes to a spiritual blindness that I had. And I'm not saying that the vestry had a spiritual blindness, because they had some really good reasons and arguments why a more historically black congregation didn't need to be paying more money for their coffee. There were some good arguments there. But this wasn't about them. This was about me. It was my eye that got open to what I was doing. And what it said to me was, do I want to do that? Because effectively, each time I bought coffee that had been possibly grown under those exploitative situations, I was pushing the button on somebody. I was making their life a lot less than what it should be in the world we live in, even for them in their situation. And when it opened my eyes to that spiritual blindness in me was exposed. It was a spiritual blindness of not even knowing. In this case, not even knowing that was the circumstances. But once I knew it, then if I was going to continue to buy coffee that was grown under those circumstances, then that was a different thing. So I've tried to buy fair trade coffee since then, which is hard to do in Washington Courthouse, though at Kroger's there is one brand that is a fair trade thing. That doesn't mean everybody needs to go out and buy fair trade coffee. Again, you can make arguments on all sides of that. So that's not the issue, whether this is right or just, or you're right or not. Don't get sidetracked on that. The issue is about me. The issue is about, for me personally, there was a place of spiritual blindness. It was exposed to the gracious judgment of God that came to me through the words of my commissioner. And in my own heart, I have a chance for healing that because God has provided a way for me to heal it. And that's the way spiritual blindness and healing works. One person at a time. Not about what it makes for everybody else necessarily, but what is in your heart, what is in your spirit. Because each time one of our own blind spots is exposed, we have the opportunity to let it be healed. And each time it is healed, a part of the harmony that God intends between body and spirit is restored.